Hi folks, welcome to the third video for week 5 of MU1111, where we're talking about the big one, Sonata form. There's often impressions that this is an extremely difficult complex form, and while it is intricate, it's not difficult, okay? There are particular terms and terminology that you need to learn, but okay, we're going to guide you through it, alright? So, Sonata form, well, what is it? For that we need to know a little bit of the history, okay? It emerged roughly during the 18th century, as with lots of the other forms that we're talking about. When we say sonata form, though, we're not talking about pieces called sonata, okay? Sometimes they, or most of the time, they have sonata form in them. Typically, sonata form occurs in the first movement, maybe sometimes in the finale as well, of these longer pieces, yeah? We also often use the word sonata for a chamber music piece, for either small ensemble or a solo piece, but sonata form also crops up in just about every genre, including symphony, concerto, etc. Okay? So I don't want you to be confused with sonata as a kind of genre as opposed to form. We're just talking about form, of course, with this course. There is a kind of set pattern of sonata form, okay, that we're going to be talking about. But it's worth saying that this pattern was put in place by music theorists. Okay, they observed pieces, they saw patterns between them, and then came up with this theory. It wasn't necessarily in the minds of the composers who were writing in this style. Okay, composers didn't write down this formula, if that makes sense. Music theorists did. So the pattern, the textbook-like version, looks something like this. Okay, we can see that it's sort of expanded from something out of rounded binary, but with lots more complex things going on, and crucially about different tonal relationships. There's these different sections, and we're going to go through each of them in turn with our good friend Mozart as our guide. Okay, so we're going to play through and listen to different bits of this C major sonata. I'm going to take it in 3 chunks, so we'll talk through, then we'll hear each chunk in turn, okay? So the first section of sonata form is called the exposition. That's a term obviously we've heard quite a lot already. The exposition, the first section. Sonata form is primarily about working through themes and then tonalities. Okay? Our textbook version starts with first theme. Maybe sometimes there's an introduction. First theme, sometimes called the primary theme, and then we have the second theme afterwards, the secondary theme. Crucially, the 2 themes vary in character and mood. Okay? They're recognizable as separate things, they're not related. They're usually linked by a transition. A really important thing is that that first theme is in the tonic, and the second theme is not. Usually it's the dominant or the relative major, obviously depending upon major or minor keys. The transition between them is sort of linking material, and it modulates. It changes us from one key to another. Okay? After we've heard the second theme, very often there's then a little coda that perhaps repeats final cadences and signals the end of the exposition, even though often it's repeated in its entirety as well. So that's the exposition as a structure. Let's listen to the exposition of this Mozart sonata, and I'll have annotated the score as well, okay? Okay, so that's the first section, the exposition. The development is the middle bit. Okay? What is developed here is, well, the dictionary definition tells us the harmonic and textural possibilities of the themes, or that what is explored. That's complex and that needs some unpacking. What do we mean by that? It has the thematic material of the first 2 themes, but in a kind of free counterpoint. Remember, folks? It plays around with combinations and modulations for different themes. So we might take smaller motifs from the themes and repeat them, explore them, have them in quite different keys as well. To talk about it generally, the development is principally a loose-knit organisation compared to the more predictable, tight-knit organisation of the exposition. The development very often has very rapid modulations, more chromatic harmony. It's very likely to contain things like false entries, shorter versions of themes, or like I say, to squash them down to their constituent motifs and to repeat those, okay? So the development is probably the hardest bit to label, okay? It changes key very, very often. But the end of it is important. The development always ends in the same way. It has a retransition, okay? These are bars that anticipate the return of the first theme in the tonic, okay? The easiest way for it to do that is to have a few bars emphasising the dominant key, okay? And the texture slows and we have a sort of obvious break in texture a lot of the time, okay? So that's the sort of difficult to follow development middle bit. Let's listen to that in the Mozart Sonata. Okay, so we've had exposition and development, then the final part is called the recapitulation, the restatement, but recapitulation is the term we use. And with that, we essentially get the first theme and the second theme again, okay? But a lot of things are quite importantly changed. So the first theme stays in the tonic, fine, usually with very little variation, but there might be some sort of melodic decorations or something like that. The transition that links us into the second theme, though, crucially, is altered, so that it doesn't modulate. It stays in the tonic. Following that, we then hear the second theme, and that is also then in the tonic. This is perhaps the most important thing at all about sonata form, that the second theme, first heard in a different key, is in the recapitulation, then sort of fixed to be in the tonic. Okay? We then might have another coda after that, which would sort of repeat cadences and things like that. So let's hear that in this Mozart piece. Okay, so that in a nutshell is the textbook definition, okay? There is, though, huge variety with all of this, okay? We might be easier for us to think of it as a kind of sonata principle that, you know, we correct that second theme in the recapitulation so it goes into the tonic. More broadly, I think we should recognise that sonata form is a kind of analytical tool rather than anything composers necessarily composed with in mind. They obviously had an idea and they recognised the patterns, but there are so many exceptions and alterations to this general framework, there's probably more exceptions than there are adherences to these kind of rules, okay? So examples of what might be exceptions, perhaps the more common exceptions would be more than two themes, okay? In which case we talk about subject groups. We would still have two subject groups most of the time. Some sonatas don't have a development at all. It just goes exposition sort of straight into recapitulation. We would sometimes call that a sonatina, depending on context. Some sonatas have no second theme at all. We just have a sort of transplanted the first theme into the development. Some sonatas have a second development after the recapitulation. Beethoven does this especially. Think of the Appassionata piano sonata, for instance. And further still, some sonatas have tonal schemes that vary wildly from that template. So Schubert and his beloved flattened mediant, for instance. I could go on. The list is really quite long for the exceptions that we sometimes have with sonata form. If there's so many exceptions, then why are we talking about it? Well, it's a useful tool, like I said. Not only are we music theorists, but we're also music analysts, or rather the things we're discussing help you with music analysis as well. So when you look at a piece that uses some of the elements of sonata form, or the sonata principle, we should bear in mind that our most important job is to be describing the piece. Okay? So some of its elements might not fit the box-like structures of our textbook version, in which case it's better to be more accurate for the notes on the page, rather than to miss important details and to pick and choose, make an extract fit the template. I'd rather not see that in your work. Okay? So that, in essence, is your overview of sonata form, what it is and how it works. Like I say, there's lots of different terminology, and we might spend a lot of time learning it and then find lots of exceptions as well. And that's frustrating. But it's so prevalent as an idea, at least some elements of it, in a majority of pieces from the classical era. So it's a really useful one to know, okay? So everything in our this week's workbook exercises is relevant with this, but obviously there's particular extracts that fit sonata form as well. So please crack on with those exercises. Obviously you've got my office hours or tutorials. Please sign up, make use of those, and drop me an email if not. Alright folks, thanks very much. I'll see you soon.